Are our actions truly free?
Have you ever wondered why you choose the things you do? Priming is essentially a technique where a previous stimulus influences how you react or evaluate something that follows. Imagine this. The sound of a ringtone that mimics an alarm clock might suddenly make you more alert. This is priming at work, using simple cues to shape your immediate response. So priming can subtly influence your immediate reactions. But how deep does this influence go? Consider how priming impacts everyday decisions through real-world examples. Take advertising, for instance. It's no secret that advertisers meticulously choose images and words to create a specific reaction. Imagine seeing an ad featuring a warm, cozy fireplace and a steaming cup of cocoa. This image doesn't just sell the drink, it subtly nudges you towards feelings of comfort and warmth, making the product more appealing on cold days. Now, let's explore mood priming in retail environments. Ever noticed how the music in stores isn't just random? A store playing upbeat, happy tunes can make shoppers feel more positive, potentially leading them to spend more. Conversely, slower, softer music might encourage you to take your time and add a few extra items to your basket. Then there's the fascinating study where participants exposed to words associated with old age ended up walking slower. This demonstrates how even simple words can prime our physical behavior. These examples show that priming can manipulate our actions and choices without us even realizing it. Priming isn't just a momentary influence, it has long-term effects as well. Consider the impact of regularly encountering health-related advertisements. Over time, these ads don't merely inform, they gradually shape the mindset, making individuals more health-conscious in their daily choices and behaviors. This is an exemplary case of long-term priming, where repeated exposure to specific stimuli subtly shifts our long-term behaviors and attitudes. Delving deeper into the mechanics, the non-conscious associative network model helps us understand this phenomenon. According to this model, our brains consist of a vast web of interconnected ideas and concepts. When one node of this network is activated by a priming stimulus, it can trigger a chain reaction, activating related nodes and strengthening these connections with repeated exposure. Similarly, the spread activation model explains how these activated ideas spread through the network of concepts in our brain, reinforcing certain thoughts and behaviors over others. Thus, priming doesn't just nudge our immediate choices, it can shape our habits and perceptions over time. In marketing, advertisers skillfully use priming to shape our perception of brands and products, subtly influencing our purchasing decisions. In the political arena, campaign messages and media coverage can prime voters to favor one issue or candidate over another, often without their conscious awareness. Similarly, in education, the way information is presented can prime students for certain interpretations or problem-solving approaches. However, with great power comes great responsibility. The line between benign influence and unethical manipulation can be thin. Priming can be used to exploit, leading individuals to make decisions they might not have made if they were fully aware of the influence exerted upon them. Encouraging a deeper awareness of these tactics can help individuals recognize when their thoughts and decisions might be subtly directed by external stimuli. Being aware of priming effects empowers you to make more informed choices.
From behind his desk in the economics department of the University of Chicago, Milton Friedman, the father of neoliberal economics, penned an op-ed for the New York Times. The year was 1970, and government regulation was trendy in the halls of Congress, passing numerous laws seeking to protect environmental and human well-being. But Friedman saw it differently. In his view, these regulations were not only bogging down corporations, but they were also forcing businesses to do something that they were not meant to do. In his view, the only social responsibility of corporations is to turn a profit for their shareholders. Regulations, according to Friedman, just slowed down the machine of progress. This is the core of neoliberalism, a theory of deregulation and free market business that is foundational to American and global enterprise today. Profit above all else. which is why greenwashing and claims of corporate responsibility must be seen less as harmless misdirection and more as tools essential to the capitalist quest of expanding corporate profits. Under capitalism, a corporation's primary goal is to generate profit for shareholders and the capitalist class. To do otherwise, to carve out space for the environment or, God forbid, the working class, would mean fewer investors, less profit, and ultimately bankruptcy. If, however, a company like Nestle, H&M, or Chevron can be seen as working towards the common good through PR campaigns and savvy marketing without having to fundamentally change their business operations, then they've just protected or even expanded their profits. In 1985, one company decided to profit off of the environmental fervor that had pervaded the 70s. They ran a series of ads like this one.
Do people really do these things just to help an endangered species make it through the night? People do.
The ads were part of the People Do campaign, which highlighted how workers were changing landscapes to aid local wildlife. The campaign was such a success that it ran well into the 1990s, and the ads even won an Effie Advertising Award for Green Eco-Marketing in 1991. But these commercials had a sinister purpose, one that masked the environmental pollution and destruction of the company that made them. Today, the late 1980s weren't a good time for Chevron's environmental track record. In 1985, one of the company's refineries had just been exposed for contaminating the local groundwater by leaking millions of barrels of oil into the ground. Then 3 years later, the company paid $550,000 to settle a lawsuit brought in connection with toxic emissions at its plant in Richmond, California. Then again in 1991, it pleaded guilty to violating both the Clean Water and Clean Air Acts, paying millions of dollars in damages. So the fossil fuel giant decided to do something about their tattered public image. Starting in 1985, Chevron shelled out somewhere between $5 to $10 million a year to create the People Do campaign. That's right, the company behind those nature-filled commercials was the oil corporation Chevron. Throughout the campaign, Chevron paid an estimated $200,000 to make each 30-second ad that marketed initiatives like their butterfly preserve.
The El Segundo Blue lives on wild buckwheat, on land that's part of an oil refinery.
A preserve that cost just $5,000 a year to maintain. A mere glance at the price tag reveals where the oil corporation's motives lie. But this type of ad campaign is common for corporations, especially large multinationals. Fast forward to today, and greenwashing, or using environmental rhetoric to boost sales or brand image while simultaneously polluting or destroying the environment, pervades marketing campaigns. From oil giants like Exxon,
carbon capture is important technology,
to Nestle,
at Nestle, we steward water resources,
right down to Instagram ads on your feed. Each of these companies have a vested stake in misleading you into believing that the product they're selling, and ultimately their company, is aiding in social and environmental change. But when it comes to greenwashing, there is a lot more at stake than getting misled. For one, it rewrites the narrative of what change and climate action means. BP's carbon footprint campaign is a perfect example of this. By redirecting public attention from their oil spills and emissions back towards our own personal carbon footprint, the oil giant made climate action much more about individual endeavors than corporate malfeasance. We see this again and again, such as with H&M's campaigns that co-opt phrases like eco-warrior and climate crusader to get you to buy more clothes. Essentially, these marketing schemes make us think that we can buy our way out of social problems, when in reality, the very companies we are buying from are causing those social problems. The second way greenwashing is so threatening is that it lulls us into a false sense of security. If we believe that corporations are changing for the good, then we can sit back and let them do their work. This is exactly what Chevron's People Do campaign was all about. Indeed, Chao Gunter, director of the Public Media Center in San Francisco, notes that through their misleading ads, Chevron implies that maybe we don't need a regulatory framework because oil companies are taking care of it. In short, if corporations can trick us into trusting them to do good, then they can do whatever they want. Greenwashing allows for businesses to continue their destructive practices by tossing scraps to us and claiming that they're giving us a whole meal. Because any real change, any effective climate action means changing the paradigm. Real means shifting priorities away from profits and towards people and planet. Regardless of what these companies say, their actions speak louder than their words. What can we as individuals do about climate change? I also really want to know why we ask this so much. Why is this our burning question about stopping climate change? As the chaos caused by climate change grows larger year after year, so too do the cries to action. But environmental action seems to have been cleaved into two distinct paths towards stopping and ultimately reversing climate change: personal actions and systemic changes. This tension takes shape most visibly in the back and forth flow of media, where news sources and blogs pour out their top lists for individual cures to climate change that inevitably get shouted down by cries for collective action as the only medicine for our climatic problem. Individual action versus systemic change. That is the binary option supplied to us in our fight to save the world. From the start, the individual option is flawed because it subscribes to an ideology that continues to prolong the problem of climate change. This notion that the solution to such a massive global issue can be solved through individual lifestyle changes like buying an electric car is a culturally specific one, based in neoliberal thought. Championed by Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher in the 1980s, the hyper-individualistic mentality of neoliberalism pervades our current world. The agenda of neoliberalism is, as journalist Martin Lucas writes, headlined by policies of privatization, deregulation, tax cuts, and free trade deals, all of which de-emphasizes the individual as a citizen able to take collective action, and instead transforms them into a consumer who, as Lucas goes on to write, is more prone to self-reliance than communal interdependence. Ways of individual change are based on the idea of the individual as the consumer, not as a citizen. There are individual actions, however, that don't rely on a consumer mindset to enact change, like voting for candidates with strong climate action proposals and holding representatives accountable by calling them. As Mary Anais Heglar writes in a Vox article, we need to broaden our definition of personal action beyond what we buy or use. Start by changing your light bulb, but don't stop there. We all too often focus on the individual market-oriented solutions to the answer, attaching virtue to those who compost their food scraps and labeling those that fly on airplanes as sinners. This overemphasis on individual action, Heglar goes on to write, shames people for their everyday activities, things that they can barely avoid doing because of the fossil fuel-dependent system they were born into. We are essentially blaming the victim. And by focusing on the individual, we miss the much bigger culprits to the problem of climate change. The 100 companies responsible for 71% of the world's global emissions, and the government policies that allow them to do it. Naomi Klein puts it bluntly in an interview with Channel 4.
If you can't be an activist unless you have already somehow purged your whole life of fossil fuels, then you'll have a movement of 3 people, which is great for the fossil fuel companies. It's an incredibly effective way to repel activists, to make people afraid to participate because they don't want to be called a hypocrite.
In short, individual actions like not driving a car, while important, are akin to throwing a bucket of water onto a burning house. It will quench some flames, but it distracts you from the fact that it will take a lot more than one bucket to stop the inferno destroying your house. This is where collective action comes in. The key is to galvanize enough public pressure on governments and industries to pass legislation like the Green New Deal, which would transform our economy so you don't have to choose between the environment and making rent at the end of the month. But what does collective action look like in practice? It can be so many things. You could host a letter writing campaign urging a company to strengthen their environmental policies or canvass for strong environmental leaders. It could be holding consciousness raising spaces for people to educate each other and connect over how climate change affects their lives. It can mean gathering together to protest, to hold your elected officials accountable, or blocking the construction of emissions-heavy infrastructure. It means looking at the work that's already being done and joining in. It could even mean creating art installations within your community, forcing local government and industries to be more aggressive on climate issues. The opportunities are endless. The only way we can truly stop climate change is to act less as individuals and more as a collective voice to force emissions-heavy industries to move past the age of carbon and urge our elected officials to represent our voices.
So, it's easy to feel a little paralyzed these days. There's a lot of doom and gloom, eco-anxiety, feelings of helplessness. And that's understandable. But this topic is all about how do we face the biggest challenges of our time with action? And how do we mobilize other people, the people next to you, into action as well? I want to do a quick experiment, though, before we start. And I'm going to ask all of the people on this front right row to put your hands up. And I would like you to wave them around, protest a little. Now, by my calculations, that is 3.5% of this room. So it seems maybe like they're just the crazy people on the front right, crazy minority. But actually, a lot of research has shown that no non-violent protest that mobilizes 3.5% of people has ever failed. So this is all we need to mobilize, to make real progress, real action on climate change, among the other issues. So this makes it all a little more tangible.